In 2021, I hit one of the lowest points of my life. And this is around the time that I discovered monk mode, the whole self-improvement movement with strict habits, no distractions, and basically a nonstop grind. Part of me truly believed that if I just dialed in hard enough, that maybe one day I'd finally feel fulfilled. But something was missing because even with all that structure, deep down, I still felt empty. It was a kind of emptiness that's hard to explain. Around this time, I was really struggling with my faith, but I realized that I didn't want just religion. I wanted connection. And it felt like everyone else around me was having these deep spiritual experiences while I was just stuck. I was essentially trying to force a connection that didn't feel real. I felt like I was doing my part, but nothing was changing. I tried so hard to believe, but it just felt like God had changed his number and I didn't have access to the new one. And around this time, I was still going to church, still participating and being active in the church community. But if I'm being honest, my prayer life was essentially non-existent. And the only time that I would open up my Bible was on Sundays. Not because I didn't care, but just because deep down I felt disconnected. It didn't feel like any of it was making a difference. It just felt like I was going through the motions and performing spirituality rather than actually experiencing it. Maybe you're in a situation or have been in a situation where you're asking yourself the same type of questions that I did. Like, how do I believe in a God that I can't feel? Why does everyone else hear from God, but I'm here stuck in silence? Or what's the point of trying if nothing is changing? I have been there, and not just once, but for years. And honestly, there are still days where I sometimes still feel that way. Days where God feels distant, and I don't understand the point of it all. When I'm carrying more questions than answers, and days when I feel like I have to get it all together before I can come close. Or even when I'm doing everything to look okay on the outside, things like monk mode. But deep down, I still know that something is missing. So if you've ever wondered how to fill that empty space on the inside, or wondering why nothing external seems to satisfy, trust me when I say that you're not alone. Because one thing that I've come to learn is that distance that you feel is not the end of the story. Sometimes it's the very place where something deeper begins. So growing up, one thing that always kept me from growing my relationship with God was this constant feeling that I wasn't good enough. I had this belief that I had to fix myself before I could come to him. And growing up in a religious family where my parents held positions at church, even though this wasn't their intention, that pressure always seemed to intensify. So I learned how to act the part, and I knew the right words, the right behaviors, the right image. But in reality, I wasn't actually living in truth, but just performing. And in a lot of ways, reflecting on it, I was just like the Pharisees, where I had an appearance of godliness, but really my heart was very far from God. So in high school, I didn't have many things that I cared about, but one thing I really cared about was soccer, being part of the soccer team. At my junior year, I was the JV captain of the soccer team. And towards the end of the season, I got called up to play with the varsity team. And this was like a dream come true because it has been something that I had dreamed about for years. And being called up, it just felt surreal. So I get called up and I'm playing with the team and I'm having the time of my life and I'm actually playing a decent amount of minutes in the games. And the team ends up having a decent playoff run, which was unexpected. I believe we got to the semifinals. We were playing really well. Eventually, at the end of the game, it was tied, so we went to PKs. And if you guys know anything about soccer, this is like a very high intensity moment where the game could go either way. So, of course, I was on the sidelines because I was not the best player, so I wasn't taking the PK. But I was extremely nervous, and I remember praying harder than I had ever prayed before in my entire life. I remember telling myself that maybe if God is real, that he'll help us win this game. Looking back on it, it was kind of silly because in a way, I was making this ultimatum with God. And we lost. As small or as trivial as this might sound, that moment kind of broke something in me. I just couldn't understand why God wouldn't hear me and why in this moment where I felt like I really needed him, it was just a very important moment for me. I just couldn't understand why he wouldn't come through. And from that day on, my heart just began to grow cold. Because between the pressure of trying to keep up a certain image and then feeling like God didn't even listen to me, it began really hard to be able to trust him. and deepening my faith just felt impossible. So throughout college and even after graduating, I kind of was able to keep up this persona, but the truth is that my heart was still very far from God, and in a lot of ways I was unrepentant. And then one night, everything changed unexpectedly. It was a regular Friday night, and my church was hosting a prayer night. Normally, I wouldn't have gone because I'd rather be going out with my friends or just resting after a long week. But for some reason, this day, I just decided to show up. I sat in the back, half distracted, not really expecting anything, because I'd been to plenty of these things before, and I'd kind of just become numb to them. But that night, they actually brought in a guest speaker, and something about the way he spoke just cut through the noise in my head and hit something deep in my heart. He didn't talk about what God could do for me. He talked about what God had called me to do in the world. For the first time, I stopped seeing God as a vending machine, and I started to think of what it would mean to live life for purpose. So at the end of his sermon, he called people up to the front. Normally, I don't go up to these things, but for some reason this night, I felt led to go. I hadn't done this in years, and part of me had stopped believing that anything would actually happen in these type of moments. But I went up and I waited, and as the speaker went from person to person, speaking into their lives, I stood there not really sure what to expect. My heart still felt closed off, and it didn't seem like there was anything he could say to me that would open it up. But then he came over to me, he leaned in and he whispered, "God, open his heart." And that is all he said. But for some reason, after that moment, something in me broke and I just started to cry. And I'm not the type of person to cry in public, like in front of people. So this was kind of a big deal. And I realized that it wasn't because I was emotional, but because I realized that for years, my heart had been closed off. Because of so many past experiences beyond what had happened in high school, I realized that I was just wounded, bitter, and numb. In that moment, my heart finally began to be open again. That prayer, as simple as it was, began to unlock something that I didn't even know was locked. So maybe you're in that moment right now and God feels far away. Maybe you've been showing up, going through the motions, doing your best to hold it all together, but for some reason your heart still feels closed. So if you're in that place right now, wondering how to come back to God when he still feels far, if you're tired of just going through the motions and actually want something real, where do you even start? Here are a few things that I wish someone had told me back then. Okay, so the first thing that you're gonna have to do is show up as you are and don't wait to fix yourself before coming to God. One of the biggest lies that I think a lot of people fall into is, once I get my life together, then I'll be able to come back to God. I used to live in this mindset. I tell myself, as soon as I stop doing this, or as soon as I break this bad habit, then I'll be able to get serious about my faith. Looking back now, it's honestly kind of wild how I basically convinced myself that I had to clean myself up before God would want anything to do with me. And it actually wasn't until I started going to the church that I go to now that this lie started to break. One day during service, my pastor said something that completely shifted my view of God. He said, "The day I sin is the day that I pray more." And that one sentence really surprised me because my default was the complete opposite. The day I messed up was the day that I would avoid God out of feelings of shame. But that quote really showed me the true heart of the gospel, that it's in those moments of weakness, shame, and guilt that God desires to show up the most. Because the truth is, if we could fix ourselves, we wouldn't need God. So if you feel yourself stuck in patterns that you can't break, that is exactly where God wants to meet you. Not after you've cleaned up, but right in the middle of your mess. So the second thing that I wish I understood is that you can still be yourself and follow God. For a long time, I thought that following God meant that I had to be someone else. Like I had to wear a mask and I had to dress a certain way or talk a certain way and give up the things that made me me. But here's what I've come to learn. God isn't asking you to erase your personality. He gave you your interests, your quirks, your creativity, and your story for a reason. None of it was by accident. You don't have to lose your style, your sense of humor, or your gifts to follow God. You also don't have to remove yourself from the people who love you and care about you. You just have to be willing to allow him to lead you to the version of you that already exists. When you show up authentically, you'll find that God doesn't make you smaller. He expands who you are. And through him, you start to discover the version of you that you were always meant to become. The third thing that I wish I knew is that you have to be honest with yourself about where you are and what you're struggling with. One thing I've learned the hard way is that you can't heal from what you're still hiding from. Deep down, we know what we're struggling with. We know the patterns, the habits, and the places that keep us stuck. But until you're willing to face it honestly, nothing will change. For a long time, I kept pretending because I didn't want to admit what I was dealing with to myself or to anyone else. But the moment that I got honest and started to reach out for accountability, that's when things started to shift. It wasn't easy. It took humility and vulnerability, and honestly, it was uncomfortable. But I came to realize that trying to grow in silence was only keeping me stuck. I remember around this time, one of the leaders in my church actually reached out to create an accountability group with me and a couple other guys. And at first, I felt so much resistance to this because I'd never been in a situation where I had to be accountable to someone. But I decided to take that step in faith and to do it because I knew that it was exactly what I needed and that I couldn't grow in isolation. Even though now I am nowhere near perfect, I've definitely grown in ways that I never thought was possible. And this actually ties into my fourth point, which is something that you guys know I always talk about. You have to find community like your life depends on it. Because this faith journey, even though it's personal, it was never meant to be walked alone. You need people around you who will remind you of who you are and what you're striving for, even when you forget. People who challenge you, encourage you, and walk with you when you feel like giving up. Because the truth is that isolation can weaken your faith, but the right community will strengthen it. And it can give you the space to grow, ask questions, and be real, and realize that you're not the only one that's trying to figure it out. Over the past few years, what I've come to realize is that God isn't looking for perfection. He's looking for humility and your willingness to show up, your honesty in the struggle, and your heart even when it feels messy, distant, or unsure. We can dress up the outside all we want, but until we really focus on what's going on inside, that emptiness will linger. And the beauty of grace is this: you don't have to fix everything before coming close. You just have to come. Because God meets us in the mess. He draws near to us when we finally stop performing and simply let him in. That's when things start to shift. That's when healing can also start and the relationship can actually become real. If this resonated with you in any way, I share reflections like this in a weekly newsletter that I'm building where I go deeper on topics like faith, growth, and purpose. And you can sign up just using the link in the description. And also go ahead and comment down below what you believe has helped you on your journey and what you believe can also help other people so that we can all grow together. Also go ahead and like and subscribe because it really helps out the channel. This is a new series I'm thinking about continuing called God Mode Diaries. If this is something that you guys would like to see more of, let me know. If not, this will be the last one. Probably not, because I like making these anyways. You guys already know the drill. I'll see you guys in the next video, but until then, don't drift.